Good morning. Last bit of folks are coming in. Move to this side of the boat, please. This side of the boat's a little heavy on this side. Trying to balance it out. Welcome. Thank you for being here at 9 a.m. in the morning. But before we get started, we're going to talk about Windows servicing. I'm John Wilcox. I'm in the Windows Servicing Delivery Group. This is...
I'm Rob York. I'm a program manager for operating system deployment on the SECM team.
We're going to talk around how to manage Intune with the change management to Windows servicing. And then Rob's going to show you how to use the tools and put it in best practice. Great audience here. Be great to get a sense in terms of where we're at. So a real quick thing just to get us going. Your participation is key for this. If you're already substantially on Windows 10 and you've done 2 updates to Windows 10 since you do that, stand up for me. Wow. I did not expect this many people. Give yourselves a hand. What? Don't sit down. Don't sit down. Don't sit down.
Interesting as well that this side seemed to be slightly heavier on the Windows 10 despite having fewer people.
That's true.
So that's interesting.
You've done 2 updates successfully Windows 10, great. You're on 10, you've done 1 update, stand up. Okay, about half the group now has done 1 or 2.
My side's still winning.
You're on Windows 10 for the first time, stand up. All right, I'm going to make the assumption for us group. You're on Windows 7 or 8, getting ready to move to Windows 10, and you're here to understand how to go do that, stand up. All right. I don't know how the next question. If you're not standing. All right. Thank you.
Good job, my side.
So deploying Windows 10 in the enterprise. Again, I'm going to sort of set the stage in terms of thinking about the process and the change management, how to prepare for the changes that comes with it. And then Rob's going to show you how to execute it and put in play with the tools that you're using. So deployment strategies and then deployment tools. Certainly what we all deal with here on a regular daily basis. Let me sort of set the stage in terms of what is Windows as a service. We call it Windows as a service, not in that it's a service in traditional mode, but we've modified the way we think about Windows to have the characteristics and the things that bring value to you as regular software as a service does. What are those things? New features and functionality on a more frequent basis to respond to the things that you or your business partners need. Awareness and visibility to what's going on so that we can improve the product in a much faster pace than we were able to go do before. So in that mode, we try to address both the market needs as well as some of the issues that you as IT administrators had as problems with the previous servicing modes for Windows 7 and Windows 8. And while moving to Windows 10 seems like it can be very daunting and challenging and complex, let's not forget Windows 7 and Windows 8 servicing was not particularly a smooth swim in the park before. Let's talk about some of the challenges we had that we wanted to address. First was all the complexity and cost of keeping your Windows 7 devices was really on you, the IT administrator. We would produce individual fixes. We would publish those out to the catalog, and you're responsible for reading, downloading them, and then making a decision about which patch to install versus which patch you wouldn't install. So all that was on you, and then once you chose which ones you wanted to install, you had to go back and audit your systems to make sure they actually got installed. So it was very complex, very costly for you. The performance was terrible as these things grew over time. And frankly, it's rather amazing if you think about it, whether you chose to install something to some degree depending upon how scary some PM back in Redmond wrote the KB up to describe what the fix was. So it was really not a great way in terms of managing things in today's environment. So we wanted to improve that, and we did. The ecosystem, because of this, became very fragmented. We had lots of different application platforms, lots of different APIs. And so as a result, ISVs and hardware manufacturers were split over in terms of where to invest, and we weren't getting the best from those environments that we wanted to have in terms of bringing value and quality to you and to your users. And lastly, because of this fragmentation, the overall quality experience that you had was less than it should be. Because you aren't running Windows in the same fashion that we tested before we shipped, because you had chosen to install certain patches and not others. The ISVs who built your applications, it was not possible for them to test their application on the version of Windows that you ran because your version of Windows was unique in the entire world. And so the ability in terms of getting great applications, debugging and finding problems was a real challenge in this environment. So we wanted to address those. And so with Windows 10, we've moved to cumulative patching, which means every time we issue a patch, it includes all fixes we've done since it was released. and you can only install that cumulative patch, and it keeps you current. It's very simple for you now to keep a device current and patched, which is have it on the latest version. And the great thing is, if you haven't patched a device in a while, it's not a problem. Simply install the latest one, and all the fixes necessary will be put on that particular device. Much simpler, much more straightforward, much less costly to keep devices current, patched, and secure. There are two types of servicing events. There are quality updates and feature updates. Quality updates are what you know as Patch Tuesday. These are that come out every month. They include just bug fixes and just security fixes. Never change features and functionality. They don't change or add new APIs. And you're very used in terms of installing these each month as they come out. Feature updates come out twice a year. We target March and September. This is where we add new capabilities, new features, new innovation, new APIs, new security capabilities. They come out twice a year, and they get installed sort of in the same fashion. Again, they're cumulative as well, which they will include all the new features and functionality from previous releases, as well as any quality fixes or security fixes. So if you skip one, which you're able to go do, when you take the next one, you'll get everything that's been shipped, and you'll be brought up to current, both cases. I often get asked, particularly for customers, which won't be a lot in this room, who are on Windows 10 and haven't taken an update for a while, well, why should I be taking updates? Gee, you really haven't shipped anything new that was interesting to us. And in most cases, it's because they haven't taken an update and they're not aware. Frankly, this is an area we have to do a much better job and we're working on in terms of making you aware of the new features and functionality that come out in each release. And you'll see us improve that in terms of the way we do this through the Windows Insider Preview program to educate you and show you the new capabilities so you can find those gems that your business partners want to go use. So this is a slide we put together. It shows every release, and it's not just a subset of some of the capabilities we've added with each release. Things like Windows Information Protection, things like AppGuard, things like Timeline. Every one of these releases has great capabilities. But there's one set of areas that also gets improved on a regular basis, which comes up frequently when we talk about servicing. And that, in fact, is the upgrade experience. Because every time we do a new version of Windows 10, we can improve the experience of the update process itself. And over time, we've made the update size smaller and smaller. And we've made the update time it takes to install it less and less. So that with 1803, the most recent release, we're very excited to say that the mean time for all devices in the world updated was less than 30 minutes. And for a modern device with an SSD, it was in the neighborhood of 10 minutes. So dramatically faster than it was back in 1607 or 1511, if that's where you first jumped on. So always new capabilities and new features that come out with each release. So from a best practices point of view, change management is really the key thing that work through in terms of those customers who tell you who've gone through a couple updates. They do not update Windows or Office today in the same way they used to do it back in Windows 7. And I'm going to guess if most of them can come up on the stage, they would tell you they probably started out that way, and they've evolved as they've understood how the process works. They've gotten a new way of addressing and approaching the update process. But if you go back and think in terms of what you used to do, you'll do the same things with Windows 10 and Office 365. But as Rob's going to show you later on, using the new tools and the capabilities, you can do it in a better, more streamlined fashion. So think about every time you do a software project, what are the types of things that you would go do? In the case of an OS update, is the OS ready for what you're trying to go do? Does it have the features and the functionality to support the applications that you want to go use? Does it have the support for drivers that have the hardware that you want to be able to go use? So we'd evaluate that process. Is it good for your network? Is your network ready for those capabilities? Are the applications that you want to go use ready for the new OS? And in the case of your experience with this in the past, when we change things frequently, we move the start screen, we take the start screen away, we put the start screen back. Do you have to go get new applications? And so your concern is going to be, gee, I've got to go do a bunch of application testing because it's going to be very painful like it was in the past. And again, the great news here is, I'll promise you, it's not going to be because apps are going to work, and I'll explain why here in a moment. Then you're going to use your training, deal with the start screens. And so you go through that process. You do a bunch of training, you create your golden image, you sign off on it. You get into a room somehow to make your deploy decision, decide it was good to go, whether you do it over email, whether you would all vote. But once you made the deploy decision, you then begin to deploy it out to your users. Don't answer this question publicly, but how many of you have made that deploy decision, you had your golden image, you started to deploy it, only to find that there was an issue and you have golden image number 3, golden image number 4, and you go through it to finally get rolled out to your users. But you do that and you roll it out. The challenge was in this model We all spent far too much time, money, and effort on the left side of that deploy decision. You spend time and money not getting value out of the software that you're trying to roll out, expense in terms of rolling that out. So the real question is, can we do a better job in terms of moving that deploy decision sooner in the life cycle of the software so that your business partners and your end users can get the value out of the software that you're rolling out to them? Because frankly, what O365, what the modern desktop is all about, is enabling you as the IT to have the same relationship with your end users that you as a customer or you as a business have with your customers in today's modern world. If you think about it, you probably know more about what your customers and your products and services, how they're being used, how they need to be improved, and have gotten more agile in terms of improving those and being competitive than you have as an IT organization of knowing what your end users and business partners are actually trying to do with your software. And what modern desktop and Windows as a service is really about is empowering you as an IT organization to have that same type of visibility, that same relationship with your end users as you have with your customers to be more agile and bring better capabilities and functionality to them than you have in the past. So how do we make this happen? This is what Rob's going to spend time in terms of using telemetry-based management, using the data and analysis that comes back from your users, from the devices, and from the applications to know what's going on, to see if the system is working as expected, or if there's an issue, be able to respond quickly to it. Being agile in terms of flight and analytics, and then using the best in terms of SSCM, using the best in terms of Intune or your tools, the update client improvements to quickly roll updates out to your users and again, get that feedback and telemetry from those users. It's not just us making this commitment or promise to you. This is in fact imperative in terms of the way we operate Windows as a service in terms of majority of our customers. Microsoft, in fact, is the IT administrator. My group is the IT administrator for over 500 million devices. They're connected to Microsoft, and we manage those devices in the same way that you have to manage the devices inside your organization. We have to be concerned in terms of the quality that those users experience. We have to be concerned when we push an update out. Is our call center staffed and able to handle the calls that might come in from those things? So how do we go about doing that? How do we as an organization manage the administration process for your devices at home, for your brothers and sisters' devices, your mom and dad's devices? Those are all connected to us and get updates every month when we decide to push them out, and every 6 months when we decide to update them with new features. We do that through the use of telemetry and data that feeds us information in real time very quickly in terms of what's going on in terms of those devices, that allows us to validate the hardware and the applications work well with the next release, or to identify if there's a compat problem or a conflict, be able to stop the update for those devices, understand the issue, fix it, unblock it, and then to turn the updates back on. So the first takeaways you're going to hear a lot more about is adopting and using data and telemetry for knowing what's going on in your organization. Again, in the same way that your company, I'm sure, has used data and telemetry in terms of understanding what your customers are doing with your products and your services. The second thing is we certainly changed the way we develop the product from the way we did in the past. You see that in terms of the way we share information. We have the Windows information or the Insider Preview program, where as soon as we ship a release, we make the next version of Windows available to you as a preview so you can begin to see the features and functionality. We get millions of people working on the next release of the product, giving us feedback so we can improve the product before it ships to you, so that you can see those features and functionality, plan and prepare to use them as you roll them out. We made changes to our engineering process so that when we report a bug to an issue, unlike in the past, the first thing we do is we fix that bug in the next release of Windows 10. We take that bug fix, we put it out to the preview program, get it validated there in the next release of Windows 10, and only once it's there validated, we then bring it back to the current version and ship it out to you. Why do we do that? Because it's important to me to make a commitment to you that when I give you that fix on the current version of Windows 10, that when you take that update, the fix that you depend upon, that you need, that you're using, is already there and will continue to work as you go forward. So we've made changes to make sure that we can deliver against this commitment around app compat and the things will work for you going forward. As I mentioned, we rely heavily on this data and telemetry, and we update these devices. Let me give you a sense of just in terms of what this looks like. We had about 10 million new devices every month. Since Windows 10 has shipped, we've had over 1 billion feature updates, approaching 14 billion quality updates since we shipped. We, in fact, have a servicing event about 300 devices of every second of every day. And every one of those servicing events is giving us data and telemetry back to validate that the next version of Windows 10 of that patch is working well on every bit of hardware and all these applications, or identifying a conflict and issue that we need to go resolve and understand. And here's the key thing that's different for you to take advantage of with Windows 10 and 365. All the data and learnings that we get from this comes back to you through the use of Windows Analytics and Desktop Analytics so that you can use this as a means for you to validate and organize the way you roll software out through your organization. Because I, in fact, will have updated all the hardware in your organization before you attempt to go do that around the world. And I share that back with you so that you can take advantage of that information. And the scale by which we do it and the speed by which we do it allows us to share that back to you and make it an integral part of the way that you roll software out. 1803 just completed. It was the fastest roll of Windows 10 since we've done. And it was all done using machine learning and the basis of this data, the telemetry that comes back from the devices. We updated 250 million devices in a little over 40 days, twice the speed that we did with previous releases. And let's show you a little secret. You've probably heard this before if you've talked to me before. So it hasn't changed. I don't have golden images for all your machines at home. I know, that's crazy. I don't have golden images for your machines at home. I pre-test all of your images and your apps before I update them. So how do we do that? We do that through this use of data and telemetry that allows us to see the issues if they pop up. But more importantly, what it allows us to do is validate that the system is working well and gain confidence, and allows me to expand the pool of devices that I provide updates to. Remember that, because as Rob talks to you about how to use the tools to set this up, it's using that concept in your organization to use that through SSEM and through analytics. But here's the thing that was most important to us. Yes, it was exciting that we rolled updates out quickly, but the experience by using the data and the telemetry to drive these decisions resulted in the best experience we've also had since Windows 10. In fact, our call volumes for Windows 10 1803 was the lowest we've ever had. So these are things that are important to us. I know they're important to you, and I share this with you to understand that what we're doing, in fact, is working at scale and brings all this value to you that you should pick up and be able to go use. Every one of these releases, besides having features and functionality, gets better as well, which is why these things happen. We've seen a 20% reduction in stability issues. As I mentioned, update times are faster. Update package sizes are smaller. Today, all this information around this telemetry and data from applications has already been shared with you. This is a screenshot of Ready for Windows. Anybody seen Ready for Windows have used it? It's a website. We publish all the information we have about applications on Windows 10. You can go search on any application. You'll see if it's being used on any particular version of Windows 10 and the volume of users, the number of users who are using it. So if you want to know, are your applications good on Windows 10, you can go to Ready for Windows. Even better than that, we share that information back to you in Windows Analytics, which you'll hear more about in just a second. So the impact to you as an enterprise customer through all this, the defragmentation of Windows, which we talked about through cumulative updates, with the consumer scale and the telemetry and the data that comes back through our process in terms of updating these devices that flows back to you, where I get this feedback faster in terms of every language, every hardware type, and every geography, means that if you were always waiting for us to get to sort of enterprise readiness, we now achieve that far faster than any previous release, but more importantly, far better with better validation than we could ever do in the past. So Windows Analytics is sort of the key tool for you to use today. That information flows back and is mapped directly back to your devices and your applications. So if you've got hardware, you can go look at this particular tool and you'll see, has that hardware already been updated by Windows 10 someplace else? And how's it working? Has the battery life gotten better? Do I need a new driver? The applications that you use, many of them are also used outside your organization. You'll see, are other users using those applications in the next version of Windows 10? That's what upgrade readiness does, helps you go from upgrade to upgrade. Update compliance will track the monthly quality updates. Are your devices patched? Are they staying current? Which devices are behind and why? It has the ability to track delivery optimization, which you'll hear more about, and see, are you getting the best out of that capabilities? And then the third is device health. How many of you know about what the status of the device health of devices in your organization where you have drivers issues? Or is your ability to find that out is when your call center gets called by users who have blue screens and then you go and respond to them. Device health uses this data and telemetry to show you where your user mode crashes, where your kernel mode crashes, where the drivers that are causing those issues to allow you to proactively go out, provide driver updates, and keep those devices current and up to date. So leverage the power of the data and telemetry in terms of using this to do a better job, more proactive job with your users. You have a lot of applications that you're going to be concerned about. I've already shown you through this data and telemetry. I will, in fact, have data and visibility for many of those applications externally that we share back with you through Windows Analytics. Some of those applications, then, you don't need to be concerned in terms of validating because you'll see that validation through other users outside your organization. You'll see that they're being broadly used on your hardware. Windows Analytics shows you all those applications being used, how broadly they are to be deployed, and allows you to narrow those down to just the specific apps that are unique to your organization, broadly used in your organization are most important. And the key thing then is with this information, setting up flighting strategies to get the coverage of those applications that you need to go do. So we're using things like SSEM. You can roll this out to get the data, and this is what Rob's going to show you how to go use. So let me leave on 4 key tools, 4 key muscles that you'll need to develop as you move to Office and Windows servicing. The first 2 you all have done and will know you'll need to go do. Infrastructure readiness. Are you on SSEM current? Get up to current so that you're able to roll out updates using the latest version of the tools that are supported. Get your flighting strategy put in place so that you can roll updates out using those tools to get the data that you need. The second one is your initial application compatibility. I'm going to tell you it's going to be good. Our experience to date, our customers are telling us 99% of all the apps work from Windows 7 going forward, those 6-bit apps, unchanged. Outside of third-party security apps, you're not going to find issues in most cases, and if you do, on the rare chance, we announced at the conference this week the application readiness program where Microsoft at no cost will step in and help you understand and remediate that issue. The third one is the key one that most cases, or many cases, starting out didn't get done. That's in-place upgrade readiness. And here's my advice to you if you haven't started yet or if you're just getting started. As you're doing the initial application compatibility testing, take 20% of your devices, immediately update them to the next release. So let's say today you're targeting rolling out 1803. Take 20% of your devices, update them to 1809. And now do your application compat testing on both 1803 and 1809 at the same time, so that you can see that your applications continue to work on 1803 as well as 1809 after an upgrade. Get comfortable and confident in terms of how you're going to manage that in-place update before you start as you do this initial work. Because as you're deploying, there will be an update. And so go ahead and understand how you're going to manage that going forward and see the apps continue to work. And lastly is innovation adoption. I'm shipping new features and functionality to you every 6 months. Do you have a process to understand? Do you have somebody in your organization who's on those preview builds, seeing the new features and functionality, doing the planning and design work for those things that you or your organization want to go use? Build that capability as well. So the last thing then is the modern servicing framework. This is shared by both Office and Windows as a common framework for how to go manage both Office and Windows updates. Starts out with the planning and prepare phase. This is the Windows Insider program for Windows. For Office, it would be the monthly servicing channel where you get early access to features and functionality. You do your planning and design work for how you're going to go use those features, and then it gets released as the SAC release. You'll then roll that out to a set of targeted users for validation. Rob's going to show you how to go do that in just a second. Once you've decided those things are good to go, you make a deploy decision, then you roll those out broadly to your organization that everybody gets to go use them. But you'll note as you're doing this, there's a new set of builds coming in the preview program that initial group is now looking at the next set of features and functionality. And so it's just rolling through your organization, much like an assembly line does on a regular basis. As I mentioned, the servicing framework is the same and shared between Office and Windows. This slide maps them into the specific executions. In the case of Office, there's specific channels that you plug in to use, so they flow to you on an automatic basis. In the case of Windows, it's slightly different. The tools, in fact, drive this process, and so we use this table to map those in to show you which applies to each part of the framework for both Office and for Windows. So with that, let me hand it over to Rob, and he's going to show you how to go put those concepts into practice now.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to do a little survey as well. Who in the room's running Config Manager today? Yeah, I like that. Who's running 1806? Who's keeping nice and up to date? 1802? Anything before that? Okay, that's pretty good. Anyone running 2012 or SCCM 2007? Excellent, that's what we like to hear. So I'm going to talk through various different scenarios that you have for managing getting to Windows 10 and staying current with Windows 10. We're going to start off with the what's new in operating system deployment. We've added a number of new features over the past few releases and a couple of things coming down the road. And then we'll change gears a little bit at the end and look at some of the improvements that Windows Autopilot and Intune have been making for those customers that are looking with one eye to the cloud and moving to modern provisioning. Who's evaluated or thinking about Windows Autopilot? Okay, that's a lot of people as well. Excellent. For those of you that are moving to Windows 10 or moving between Windows 10 versions, in-place upgrade is the recommended approach over wipe and load, for example. And it's increasingly the more common approach. We see through our telemetry that more and more customers are using the in-place upgrade because it gives them that faster, easier cadence, especially when they move from Windows 10 to Windows 10 version. Because of this, we've put a lot of effort into our documentation and also to the feature to allow you to get the most out of the in-place upgrade and to be able to benefit from the community and the way that they're also doing their in-place upgrades. So we've added the in-place upgrade task sequence template, and this is based on our Microsoft field. It's also based on our MVPs providing their feedback on what customers are doing with in-place upgrades. But crucially, it's also based on what customers that are already deploying at scale with Windows 10, what they're doing, so that we can feed that into our product and benefit the rest of the customer base at large. So you can see we have the basic task sequence template as the wizard finishes. But if I flip over to my demo, we can look at some of the changes that I've added into a task sequence. So prior to the upgrade, we can do a compatibility scan. We've added the ability to do the Windows setup compatibility scan without the need for downloading the package. So we map a network drive and we run that over the network, and we can then use that information to decide whether we're going to go ahead with the upgrade. Here I'm going to uninstall a line of business app that I know doesn't work with the new version of Windows 10 because it's my old version. We go through the upgrade. We can do any post-upgrade setup, such as setting the default app associations. I'm now going to install my new shiny 2.0 version of my Contoso line of business app. We can also do things like install Office and remove the Office 2010 that was maybe on before. And then crucially, at the end, we have the ability to do actions on failure. So we can collect those logs, we can move those off to a server share for further analysis, and we've worked closely with the setup diag team in Windows so that we can run their diagnostic tools natively within the task sequence, again, just to help your troubleshooting and keeping your get current motion moving. Slight panic there. We've added WDS-less PXE to SCCM 1806. What this means is that you're no longer dependent on the Windows deployment server framework being installed. One nice little advantage of this is that it means that you're no longer dependent on the server SKU of Windows. We know there's plenty of customers that have branch offices where they are unable to place server infrastructure for security or cost or simply space reasons quite often. And they often leverage Windows client SKUs as kind of quasi-distribution points in those locations. We've always supported those client SKUs as distribution points, but starting in 1806, we have WDS-less PXE available on those client SKUs. So it removes the need for unnecessary branch infrastructure. It's very straightforward to enable. If you already have a distribution point that's enabled for PXE today, you just go in and you enable that one single tick box, and our PXE provider will take over, and WDS PXE will stop being the responder on that box. Equally, if you want to enable it, there's just a couple more tick boxes first to enable the PXE distribution point, and then to tell it that we're going to use WDS-less PXE. If you tick that box, you don't need to have the prerequisite of having Windows deployment services installed before you install the distribution point. Something we've been working on across the product within Config Manager is improved security. Some of this has been driven by the integration with Azure Active Directory, but we're able to benefit from that in operating system deployment. So we added this feature in 1806 called Enhanced HTTP, and I went into a bit more detail on this in my session on Monday, so I'll give you the quick appraisal. But what enhanced HTTP allows you to do is it allows you to specify that any sensitive information to do with authentication in your environment is passed using HTTPS or using SSL, but the management points will continue to function as HTTP management points. So you're not adding complexity to your infrastructure, you're not requiring a PKI environment to secure that traffic. We'll use our own self-generated certificates within Config Manager to secure that sensitive traffic. Once you've enabled that, what it allows you to do is it allows you to reduce your dependency on the network access account. So traditionally in Windows PE, we've needed to specify the network access account in order to retrieve content from the distribution points. When you've enabled enhanced HTTP within your SCCM site, you can actually go and remove your network access accounts for most of the scenarios in operating system deployment. Pixie and boot media to come, but for client upgrades or wipe and loads, you can benefit from the token auth that we've added and remove the need for your network access accounts. So we're not passing credentials. This was a very popular one on our user voice site where we receive feedback from customers, the ability to mask sensitive data stored in task sequence variables. So we've had the ability to mask sensitive data in collection variables for a very long time, but until very recently, if you added a task sequence variable in the task sequence, the variable was there for anyone with edit access to the task sequence to see. So here's the behavior of old. We can see the value. I've got my secret ignite variable, and you can see that it's BRK3018. In 1806, I can tick the box to say, do not show. Changes the UI slightly, and I have to specify it twice, so we'll validate that the value has been entered correctly. But that means that that value is not displayed in the task sequence editor. It's also masked when it's executed on the client. In a similar vein, we heard that customers were passing passwords for things like mapping network shares and accessing scripts and so on and so forth in the actual program name, and that was then exposed in the log file if a nosy user went into the logs and started poking around. So we've added a variable, OSD do not log command, and we can hide variables that you potentially don't want users or maybe even your help desk to see. We've also added the option to use full disk encryption. This was really driven by certain compliance and regulation environments. It's certainly not the recommended approach because it will add significant build time to your OSD task sequences, but we have the option to specify that enabling BitLocker uses full disk encryption. By default, we only encrypt the used data. All of your data is still encrypted, and then anything laid down gets encrypted by BitLocker as it's written, but there is an option now to use full disk encryption. We're also seeing a trend amongst a lot of customers around increased mobility. And what I mean by increased mobility is, I'm guessing a good fair few people in here, they have laptops, they've probably done some work from the conference, maybe you work from home, maybe you have flexibility. More and more customers are seeing more and more of their users not be chained to a desk 9 to 5, 5 days a week, which has made it difficult for not only patching and compliance with the quality updates, but also with their get current and stay current motions. We've added support for in-place upgrade over Cloud Management Gateway. So Cloud Management Gateway is one of our Azure services that you can attach your existing SCCM environment to the Azure cloud and start to expand your perimeter network into the intelligent edge of Microsoft Azure. And what this means is that you get management of your devices as they roam around the internet, and we've added support for in-place upgrade over the Cloud Management Gateway. So what this means is that you can manage your stay current motions while your users are sat at home working from home. We're also seeing a trending increase in cloud enabling of branch offices. This is where customers are starting to realize, or maybe they've always known, that the same internet provider that charges them $10,000 a month for a 1 meg leased line will charge them $100 a month for a gigabit DSL line, and they're starting to look at how they can move some of their less sensitive business traffic over the internet to preserve their WAN link for their business critical and line of business apps. One of the ways that they can do this is by using the cloud distribution points in SCCM and having the clients in those branch environments pull the content over that cheaper, faster internet connection. And we can then layer on peer-to-peer scenarios or even pull distribution points into those scenarios so that even the pull distribution points are pulling content from the cloud distribution point over the internet, not over the WAN link. We're also seeing more and more customers move to user empowerment. And user empowerment is about choice. Users are more and more familiar with interacting with IT. Pretty much every single user has a phone that they've set up, and they've gone and requested apps, and they self-service those personal phones. Organizations are starting to pivot to that and provide much more choice and self-service to their users. One of the best ways you can provide choice to your users for get current and stay current with Windows 10 is to allow users to opt in to pilot and early adopter rings. Work with a number of customers that have effectively mirrored the Windows Insider program within their own business, and they see significant growth of that group month on month as people say, "Ooh, you've got new shiny stuff. I want new shiny stuff," and they sign up, and you increase your pilot groups, you increase your initial adopters, but you also increase your testing and validation to give you the confidence to start rolling out to, admittedly, those users that are at the other end of the spectrum that are never going to want new stuff. So you have to revert to forcing it on them at some point. In terms of roadmap for operating system deployment in Config Manager, we'll have full Windows 10 1809 support. We're working on expanding the cloud management gateway scenarios for OSD. Currently, we only support download and execute, so we're looking at things like download on demand, so that we can be a bit more intelligent about what content gets downloaded, and also boot media scenarios. There's a couple of scenarios that we want to finish around the security improvements and making sure that the NAA reduction is complete. And also simplification. So simplification is one of our themes that we have across all of the features in SCCM. And for OSD in particular, this is things like image management, driver management, and also the management insight rules that we've started shipping directly into the product so that you can gain insights into the data that exists in your Config Manager database, and we can provide best practice guidance based on your true data that sits in your database. One of the things that we've already provided in line with simplification is this offline servicing capability. So this is something that you could previously do by opening up WebMTest and making a few changes directly to the provider. Not necessarily the easiest or nicest experience. So we've now exposed, in technical preview at least, the ability to specify a local drive that we'll use for offline servicing. Previously, we'd used the drive that SCCM was installed on, not necessarily the drive that's most suitable for you to use for offline servicing, so you can now go in and choose a particular drive. One of the other changes that we've made, or one of the features that we've introduced, is phased deployments. And again, we talked about this on Monday, but I'm just going to recap it again now. Phased deployments really allow an administrator to move away from the white glove, what we call green button approach to deployments. So I'm guessing most customers today, when it comes to phasing their deployments, they create their pilot, they deploy their pilot, they wait, maybe hold their breath. Okay, everything's good. They press the green button and the next phase begins, and it's gated on either help desk calls or I'm not being shouted at, so we can proceed. What phased deployments allows you to do is shift to a red button approach. Still have the control and the ability to back away if there are issues, but we'll gate that on the issues as they come in rather than softer variations such as being shouted at. So the phased deployment model is that at the beginning of your deployment, you have a pilot group, and we begin the deployment to the pilot group. And we have a success criteria that the IT admin specifies to move from the pilot group to the production group. And then we have sequencing and timing across that so that we can specify how long the production phase lasts. So let's just have a quick look at that in the console. So we support it on a number of features, but I'm going to use operating system deployment. We also support it on Windows on updates. So if I go in and create phase deployment, – . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . just take a second. Come on. There we go. So I'll give it a quick name. And then you can see that it asks me for my first collection and second collection. So by default, we default to a pilot collection and then a production phase, but it will give me the opportunity to add additional phases later on. I'm just going to quickly select a couple of empty collections because I've been burnt in the past doing demos. And you can see here that it asks me to specify my deployment success percentage. Just zoom back out. Zoom in not working. So you can see that I can specify 95% as my success criteria. Maybe I'm slightly less stringent, so I can change that to 90%. I can specify how many days that the pilot phase must last before we assess that criteria. So I'm going to say that's 5 days. Or I can say manually begin the phase, so we still give you the ability to have that green button approach. Then you can see I have the deployment phases here, so I can go in and add more phases if I want to provide that information. There we go. Another feature that we've announced, or another product that we've announced this week, is desktop analytics and the integration into Config Manager and also Intune. So desktop analytics, it's full Windows analytics functionality, and it allows you to use the data that exists in your Windows estate to make decisions and provide valid and relevant information about your estate, rather than you picking your random pilots. And quite often we see customers having very isolated pilot groups of maybe the IT group or the IT group plus the project management team because they sit down the corridor. And we'll have full integration both to Config Manager and Intune. Intune integration will be a little later down the line. And it allows you to be productive with both Windows and Office, so we'll provide information on your Windows estate and your Office estate. And you can use it to garner insights into your Office deployments and the state of your Office estate. It gives you full deployment monitoring and diagnostics. And crucially, the integration into Config Manager will it'll give you information on valid and relevant pilot groups. So we'll say, this is your pilot group that you have today. If you expand it to include these machines, it gives you the most concentrated but relevant pilot group in your estate. So we'll look for the number of machines that give you the smallest number of machines that give you the most coverage of your estate, so that you can have easy and early information about the relevance of it and the issues that may occur for an upgrade. And if we see potential issues, we'll give you the ability to move those out of the pilot and deployment phase until a mitigation comes along that allows you to upgrade those machines that are issues. It might be that the app needs fixing. It might be that there's third-party encryption that's going to block it. Whatever it is, we'll give you that insight so that you can use that data to intelligently define your rollout criteria. And the idea is that it'll help you go from an adoption rate that currently looks like this, lots of effort for a long period of time infrequently, to smaller amounts of effort more frequently. Another area that we've expanded SCCM is around the data management in your network, so aka keeping the network guys off your back. We've added boundary group relationships that allow you to create relationships between your boundary groups and specify fine control over failover and fallback for management points, distribution points, software update points, and even now cloud distribution points, so giving you that fine control of how content flows in your environment. So today you might have something that looks like this with various different boundary groups representing physical sites in your environment. We also add the default boundary group, and there's an inherent fallback from every single boundary group in your environment back to that default site boundary group. And you can also override those and specify specific relationships between a boundary group that you have and the default boundary group. And you can also specify that it doesn't fall back. So my VPN clients, for example, it's not relevant for them to fall back to the default boundary group. But what we've also added is the ability to specify cloud distribution points as associated to boundary groups. So I can specify that my low-speed branch, so my internet, but it's internet connected, and my VPN clients will go to the cloud distribution point as their initial content source. We also have a number of peer-to-peer options, so again, reducing the need to transfer content over your WAN links. We've got a number of different options within Config Manager. The recommendation is to use the one that suits you, or the combination of the ones that suits you. So it might be that multiple peer-to-peer options work in conjunction for your environment. We've added Config Manager Peer Cache that is native to the Config Manager client and allows them to share content between each other, again, reducing the amount of traffic that needs to go over your WAN link. We've also got deep integration with delivery optimization. Recently, we've added the ability for clients to share boundary group information and tattoo that into delivery optimization so that you can use your existing network boundary groups that you've specified in Config Manager. Delivery optimization can use those to intelligently determine which clients it should be sharing content between. And we've also added support for Windows LEDBAT. Windows LEDBAT, for those of you that don't know, is a TCP congestion module in Server 2016 and Server 1709 and beyond. And it allows clients to leverage background network without impacting foreground and important line of business applications. It's very easy to enable on the distribution point properties. You just specify enable LEDBAT. We're working very closely with the Windows servicing team to integrate changes that they're bringing based on your feedback. So quality updates, the feedback was that there was a large download size for Config Manager and WSUS, and there was a large perf impact large perf impact on the memory of your clients using Express to calculate the deltas. There's also limitations based on the particular builds that you needed to be on in order to leverage those Express updates. So yesterday there was a session announcing the new update payload. That's the download size will be slightly larger than the Express quality update, but the download on your distribution points will be much smaller, so you're using less space than those Express updates were previously. And it's applicable to any baseline starting with 1809 with a significant memory utilization improvement. So you can see here on the diagram that the new quality updates in 1809 will be slightly larger than the Express updates of old, but it's a significantly smaller payload onto your distribution points. It's available in 1809 to all customers, and there's no changes needed to Config Manager, so you'll be able to benefit from the new update format in your existing SCCM workflows today. Similarly, we heard the feedback that for feature updates, there was a large download size to the PC, and that often your feature on demand or language packs were lost between upgrades. And there was no single jump. You had to upgrade to the latest feature update, and then you had to go and patch to get to the latest quality update as well. So it was a two-step process. So with the new unified update platform, again, there was a bigger session on it yesterday, but the UUP platform allows you to get current in a single step. You'll patch both the feature and the quality update simultaneously. It's designed to preserve your feature on demand deployments as well as your language packs. And it lowers the network traffic to your PCs as well, so the payload will be smaller. There is a slight payoff in that the payload size for Windows Update and WSUS and Config Manager will be slightly bigger, but the actual payload being transferred to the client will be reduced. We'll be announcing a public preview later this year, so keep your eye out for that, and we'll have integration for that private preview with Config Manager and WSUS. Okay, so switching gears slightly to Windows Autopilot. Windows Autopilot we announced at Ignite last year, and it was intended as a solution to customers that were starting to look at modern management and reducing the cost of their deployment mechanisms for getting new devices to users. So the traditional mechanism is that you build and maintain that custom image, maybe crack it out once every 6 months or maybe more frequently, maintain and lovingly look after that image, send it to your OEM so that they can layer it onto your devices that you're ordering, maybe with some white glove service where they applied images and provision the user's mailbox onto the device and then ship the device to the user. A couple of problems that customers were telling us about this process is that it made it difficult to stay current because they were constantly having to update that image. Quite often their OEMs weren't able to start shipping the new OS for some time until they'd tested and they were happy with the image that you'd sent them. And it was also a very expensive process to provide this to users. The average cost that customers were reporting that they pay for their white glove process is anywhere in the range of $10 a device to $200 a device. So a big markup on top of the hardware cost just to get a device to a user. And as I mentioned earlier, users are more and more familiar with the idea of unboxing their device, turning it on and doing some initial setup to get themselves ready and going. So what Windows Autopilot does is it allows you to ship devices directly to the user. They get that fresh unboxing experience, the lovely ozone smell, and then the device gets transformed into a productive device with very little effort, all automated using the Windows Autopilot service, and the end result is that the user has their productive and secure device. The way this works is that you work with your OEMs, and the OEMs pre-register the devices that you're ordering into the Windows Autopilot service. So making that registration of that device to your environment. That then syncs into Intune, and from Intune you're able to specify the profile that is applied to a device, and it's the profile that defines the initial config of how that user receives that device. The lucky employee then receives a nice shiny device, shrink wrapped. It's not got Cheeto fingerprints on it. There's no coffee stain on the cardboard. Nice and fresh, and they get that lovely, happy, glowing feeling of having the new device. They turn the device on. It goes out to the Windows Autopilot service. The device sees that it's registered to Autopilot. That profile then defines the out-of-box experience they have. And we have a number of different Windows Autopilot scenarios. So the one I've just described there is really the user-driven mode. Works for Windows 10, 1703 and above. And the way that the device is provisioned is that it's joined to Azure Active Directory. We then use the Azure Active Directory premium capability to auto-enroll into Intune. Intune is then able to lay down the configuration. And for those customers that are looking at co-management and continuing to have one foot in the on-prem whilst benefiting from the value add that the cloud and Intune brings, we're able to then push SCCM down to that Autopilot provision device over the cloud management gateway. So very quickly you have a device that's gone from in a box, shrink-wrapped, to being joined to Azure Active Directory, enrolled into Intune, and managed by SCCM co-management. We also announced this week about hybrid Azure AD join during Autopilot. So if the device has line of sight to a domain controller during the Autopilot flow, we now have the ability, starting in 1809, to make that a hybrid Azure AD join during that provisioning. So you can, again, have that cloud attached value of on-prem and the cloud. We've also announced this week Windows Autopilot for existing devices. And I know there was only a few people that put their hands up for Windows 7 at the beginning, but Windows Autopilot for existing devices is for customers that are starting to look at Autopilot user-driven mode for their new devices, and they're looking at their old Windows 7 devices and thinking, these devices, they might be running Windows 10, they might be running Windows 7, but the hardware is fairly new, we're not ready to throw them out yet. We have Windows Autopilot for existing devices. From Intune, we can configure that Autopilot profile. We have the ability to specify things like whether the user sees the end user license agreement, whether the user is going to be a standard user or an administrator at the end of the flow. Also, starting in Windows 10 1809, we have the ability to specify a naming scheme. So you can specify, rather than having it desktop and then a random set of characters. You can specify to use the serial number or maybe your own special prefix, and then a random number of a length of your choosing. For those customers that already have Windows 10 today, if you want to move to Windows Autopilot and you want to ensure that if that device gets reset for any reason, that it also goes through the Autopilot experience, you can use Intune to create dynamic groups of those devices, and you can assign an Autopilot profile to that dynamic group in Intune. And what Intune will do is it will go out and it will gather the hash of that Windows 10 device, and it will register it automatically into the Autopilot service for you. So you're not only able to benefit from Windows Autopilot for your new devices that you're shipping to your users, but if you have devices that may get reset and you want to be re-provisioned, you can have Intune register those automatically for you as long as they're running Windows 10. We also have the ability to create dynamic groups based on the Autopilot profile that you assigned. So we can tattoo, when we register a device or when your OEM registers a device for you, you can specify the order ID that gets provided as well, and we can use that to group devices so that you can automatically apply Autopilot profiles to devices based on maybe their use case. So maybe you have a power user group and a standard user group. The power users get local admin, the standard users don't, and you can use that order ID to group those devices based on the order that you made. We also have the ability to pre-assign users to devices. When the user goes through the out-of-box experience, they will see customized branding based on your environment, but we now have the ability to pre-assign a user. So in the Intune console, you can, in the Intune console, you find the device, you can click Assign User, and then you can find that user that you want to be provisioned. And what will happen when the user goes through the Autopilot experience, rather than being prompted to enter their email address, we already know who that device is being provisioned for, so they'll get a nice welcome saying, hey, Toby, enter your password and we'll register you with the domain. Starting in 1809, we also have the ability to block local sign-in. So previously, when a user went through Autopilot, there was the change account option in the bottom corner that allowed them to break out of the Autopilot flow. It meant that they wouldn't join Azure Active Directory, they wouldn't enroll into Intune, they'd end up with a non-productive device. But now we have the ability to stop the user from doing that and force them to make sure that that device is then enrolled. You'll see that the option disappears at the bottom, and that's again specified in the profile configuration that I showed you previously. We've also added the enrollment status page. So rather than have the user just drop out to a desktop with no apps, we have the ability to configure the enrollment status page to say, show this to the user until all required applications and profiles and device configurations have come down. So you can see that we're waiting for device preparation, device setup, and then my SCEP server's not working, so the certificate failed, but everything else was provisioned. In the event of a failure, we have the ability to define what the user can do in that scenario. So I've allowed my user to try again, reset the device, so we can try going back through the Autopilot experience and hopefully it'll work the second time, or they can read that information, and in my environment, I'm allowing them to say continue anyway, so that they drop out to the desktop. They'll get whatever applications and configuration was provisioned, and then maybe there's an application missing. They can ring the help desk or try reprovisioning that through the company portal or software center, depending on where your applications are flowing from. And I previously touched on the Windows Autopilot for existing devices. We've been working very closely with the Autopilot team to make sure that this is a scenario that you can leverage in your configuration manager environment. And it's based on the premise that not all of the hardware that's running Windows 7 is ready for disposal yet. Many organizations have been buying in new Windows 10 ready hardware and laying down a Windows 7 image for it. And just because they're looking at moving to Windows 10 and Autopilot doesn't mean that they're going to throw away their 6-month-old device and replace it with a new one. They're looking at how they want to get the most out of that asset. So Autopilot for existing devices allows you to give your users an Autopilot experience on their existing devices. For Windows 10 devices, as we previously mentioned, you can extract the hash and register that device into Autopilot and then reset the device, and they automatically get the autopilot experience. That hardware hash is not available on Windows 7. So autopilot for existing devices allows us to layer down a new Windows 10 image. The device then boots into Windows Autopilot user-driven mode, the experience that we just talked about, and they get the full Windows Autopilot experience. And it's available starting with Windows 1809 and later. Here I'm mirroring the signature image. I'm only laying down the image and applying some drivers. It's the cleanest and quickest way of getting into the autopilot experience, and it also mirrors the Windows Autopilot experience that your new devices get. All of the configuration, all of the apps is going to flow from Microsoft Intune or Configuration Manager if it's a co-managed device. The way that we achieve the autopilot experience on these existing devices is to provide a autopilot configuration file in the form of a JSON file. You can craft this manually, but the easiest way to get this is using the existing autopilot commandlets. And I'm just going to quickly connect to Intune. So you log on with your tenant administrator. Remember my credentials from earlier when I was prepping the demo. And then we use the get autopilot profile commandlet, and we then convert that to the JSON. So this is already available in the commandlets that are available today. And what that will do is it will go and pull out all of the profiles that I have in my Intune tenant. And I should have one at the top, ready for the demo. There we go, MS Ignite 2018. So I'm going to get everything that's encapsulated in we'll trim that out in Notepad. And then I'm just going to drop that into Notepad, clean up the extra commands. So I take everything that's encapsulated in the curly brackets, and then I save that as a JSON file called autopilot configuration file.json. Yes, I'll overwrite. And then all I need to do is I need to create a package that contains that file. And I have one that I made earlier. Go to packages rather than applications. I'll just create a new one. Contain source files, just grab the location. I'm not going to create a program because we're just going to literally use the payload of that in the task sequence later on. And here I have my task sequence that's already creating the autopilot experience. And then you see here I have my apply autopilot configuration. So I just specify the package that I've just created. And that JSON file that we just downloaded will now be applied during the build. So all we do is we provision it into the Windows/provisioning/autopilot directory ahead of the device booting into the out-of-box experience. And I have a quick video. I didn't want to take the 30 minutes of your time because we don't have that much time today unless you want to stay. But I figured what I'd do is I'd show you a quick, sped up version of the flow of how the autopilot for existing devices works. So a bit of nostalgia for those of you that are already on Windows 10, but I'm starting with my Windows 7 device. It receives the autopilot experience. User says, yep, okay, give me Windows 10. My favorite bit is how fast the little donut's going. It amuses me every time. So the device boots into Windows PE. We download and install the image. For anyone that's spent more than 30 seconds in OSD land, this will be very familiar. We then apply the Autopilot configuration file, and then very quickly the device is booting into the out-of-box experience. Windows UBI then picks up that JSON file that we've just provisioned. We skip over the EULA. We're then prompted to specify the region settings. And then very quickly, we should get the branded experience. So you see, welcome to Intune DOM. User logs on, enters their password. And because this user has previously used Azure Active Directory, they're already registered for multi-factor authentication. So when we then prompt them for the Windows Hello for business config, we're then going to go and benefit from the security of Azure Active Directory, prompt them for multi-factor authentication. They receive a text message with the one-time code. They provide authentication in the multi-factor format, and then we drop them out at their Windows 10 desktop. And at this point, the device is enrolled into Intune. We can deploy the config manager agent for those of you that want to end in a co-managed state, and we can start to push the applications. The only thing that's not covered there is the enrollment status page. But if the enrollment status page is configured in your tenant, we'll also see the enrollment status page based on the settings that you've provided in your environment. So what we've talked about today is the change management and the process for getting to Windows 10 and staying current with Windows 10, and also the both modern and the traditional approaches that you can have for deploying and managing Windows 10 in your environment. We're halfway through the week, so we're about halfway down the slide now, but there's a number of other sessions that are going on with regards to Autopilot, SECM, operating system deployment, all of the different device management capabilities. Big special call out for the config manager chalk and talk that we have tomorrow. It really should just say AMA. We have no slides. It is a completely open mic session. Bring your questions. Everyone from the product group that's here at Ignite will be there, including our director of engineering. So come along to that, bring your questions, and also you'll be able to hear the different questions that other people have. We do have a couple of minutes for questions now, if anybody has any questions, but please do use the mics. Thank you.